Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We have our eyes on deal making today, both at home and abroad. President Trump, of course, touting economic deals with partners in the Middle East. While here at home, his partners on Capitol Hill, if you will, Republicans in the House in particular, are trying to work a deal to make sure his legislative agenda can pass. Of course, inclusive of extending the 2017 tax cuts, other measures as well, trimming of Medicaid. The problem is the deal that needs to be reached is the one that seems still elusive for House Republicans, and that is a deal on the cap for the state and local tax deduction.
Yes, the mighty SALT, which we've been talking about for months. We're not done yet, but to Kailey's point, some work was accomplished overnight. It was an all-nighter. In fact, we saw lawmakers falling asleep at the dais in the Ways and Means Committee right around 5 a.m. They managed to advance legislation 26-19 was the vote in Ways and Means. Of course, not the only committee marking up legislation. It all leads us to a potential vote on the floor in time for Memorial Day, as the speaker mentioned. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall joins us with more here, our Washington correspondent live on Capitol Hill. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So as these House tax writers did advance this bill, as you're mentioning, there's still some pretty big questions here, most notably when it comes to what is going to happen to lifting the SALT cap. Some big questions on the table, except for that we do know the one man that's heading up those negotiations is House Speaker Mike Johnson. And he says even as there are disagreements and tries to tell us that we could expect some sort of deal soon, they're still on track to pass this legislation by the Memorial Day holiday. As you're about to hear, he told reporters that they're making some good progress.
We're still on target to hit that Memorial Day deadline, which people balked at when we first said it. The American people are counting on us to get this done and get it done quickly, and we are on target to do it. We're working around the clock to build that consensus to get the 218 votes and deliver on President Trump's America First agenda.
Now, he mentioned the threshold that they have to reach there. That's important because these lawmakers from high tax states like New York, New Jersey, and California are really digging in because they do have leverage since the majorities in the House are so slim. Now, the current proposal on the table would raise the SALT cap from $10,000 to $30,000 with income limits. These lawmakers say that's not good enough in order to ease the tax burden on their constituents. And there might be a way out of this. In fact, we know that the current House tax bill is pricing in at about $3.8 trillion, but lawmakers were given about $4 trillion to work with, so perhaps there's some wiggle room there for a deal. Joe and Kailey, we're also watching some other compromises on this front, including whether or not they would double the cap for married couples. That's something that's been floated on the table, as well as what expiration dates would look like. So perhaps they'll lift the SALT cap, but then it just might not stay on as long.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live in Capitol Hill, on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much. And we go from the Hill now to the Middle East. We find Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern, Bloomberg chief political correspondent, of course, live in Doha for us, where President Trump is getting ready to participate in a Qatari state dinner. Annmarie, this, of course, is stop number 2 on the president's trip to the Middle East, which in large part is about attracting investment. The White House is talking about potentially upwards of $1.2 trillion in economic exchange between the U.S. and Qatar. But what tangible do we really know about?
Well, there's more than $200 billion of what's actually more tangible deals that were done. Maybe that $1.2 trillion, Kailey, we can call concepts of a plan or aspirational. But when it comes to the $200 billion, look at the sectors that this administration is focused on. There's really a theme here throughout the entire trip, whether it's Riyadh, Doha, or Abu Dhabi. Obviously, you have the biggest military installation for the U.S. government in Doha, so no surprise that there is also a big deal when it comes to defense, counter drones with Raytheon. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Boeing, the shares that skyrocketed, although Bloomberg a week ago was reporting about this, saying 100 wide-body jets Qatari Airways was looking to purchase from Boeing. They actually upped that to 160 today when the president and the mayor came out and talked about it. And then other things like quantum computing. AI technology is huge for this region right now. We are talking about traditional economies in this region when it comes to energy, oil, gas, that they want to move beyond and look to how they can transform their economies. For a place like Qatar, Gas, LNG is huge. They're looking at potentially other ways to diversify and make a more dynamic economy. And that same theme will carry on tomorrow when the president goes to Abu Dhabi. NVIDIA, AMD, they potentially will be the big winners when it comes to the fact that the Emiratis say they are ready to invest $1.4 trillion, but they need access to those advanced chips.
Indeed, big week. These are big headlines you're talking about, Annmarie, and it's great to have you with us here, whether it's NVIDIA or Boeing. Hearing less talk about Turkey and Ukraine. What will those headlines be later this week?
Well, the president once again today left the door open on potentially going to Istanbul. Of course, he is in the region. He's in the neighborhood. There's a potential he could peel off and add this. He did say, I have a full schedule tomorrow when he goes to Abu Dhabi. But the fact of the matter is, I think the president, if you really read between the lines, if President Putin decides to go to Istanbul, President Donald Trump will go to Istanbul. He recently just met face to face, that really remarkable photo in the Vatican, sitting face to face with Volodymyr Zelensky. He has not done that just yet with Vladimir Putin. I think if there's an opportunity to, and he's a quick flight away, he will take that opportunity. As of now, though, no plans yet.
That would be a big deal. With us live from Qatar, Annmarie Hordern. Annmarie, thank you so much. As we follow the president's travels throughout the Middle East, we have the voice of Natasha Hall, Senior Fellow with the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Natasha, it's great to have you with us. I wonder your thoughts just broadly on the optics behind this trip so far. It's been a story of investment, dollar signs, a different type of diplomacy than Americans were used to in the Biden administration, right down to having actual high-tech executives yesterday, whether it was Sam Altman or Jensen Huang, meeting the Crown Prince alongside Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia. How would you describe this journey, and what will it bring the White House?
Yeah, it's been an earth-shattering, I think, few visits already. I think what we can say is that this is an America first strategy. I mean, a lot of the deals that are being made also portend a future where the U.S. has a bigger role in terms of military technology, in terms of AI, than potentially China, for example. And then, yesterday with the announcement of the cessation of sanctions on Syria, the talks ongoing about hopefully a ceasefire in Gaza. We don't know what will happen there. But I mean, this is really, I think, an America first rather than a Netanyahu first policy strategy. And that's what we've seen so far.
Well, and when we consider these American first policies, the attempt to attract more investment from these countries into the United States, America also has to give a little here as well. Annmarie was just talking about movement on chips, for example, for the UAE. To what extent is this for the countries that are hosting the president also a chance for them to extract concessions or things they want from him?
Well, that's exactly what we've been seeing. We know that Saudi Arabia, for example, has wanted some kind of defense pact with the United States, has wanted help with a civilian nuclear program as well. But previous administrations had been tying that to the Abraham Accords. So Saudi Arabia essentially normalizing with Israel. And we're seeing that that's not necessarily on the table or doesn't have to be on the table anymore. And so this is very much a symbiotic relationship, that there is going to be hundreds of billions of dollars in investment from the Gulf. And in return, I think the Gulf gets some foreign policy wins. And we saw that with the sanctions announcement yesterday. And hopefully we see some more movement on the Gaza front today or tomorrow.
So what is Benjamin Netanyahu thinking right now after witnessing this meeting between President Trump and Syria's new leader, knowing that President Trump is not making a visit to Israel? What does this mean for their relationship?
I mean, this is truly astounding, Joe. If you think about just a few months ago, this was a man, Ahmed al-Shara, with a $10 million bounty on his head as a former al-Qaeda affiliate. And, we didn't know what the optics would look like with this meeting, but they were very conciliatory, shaking hands, smiling. President Trump has said he's a great guy, strong past. Things that I couldn't have possibly imagined just a few months ago. The other thing to consider is that President Trump continues to say that he is consulting with Erdogan, which I'm sure raises some alarm bells for Israel, which sees Turkey as an increasing threat with the fall of Assad, its neighbor to the north. So I'm sure there's a lot of concerns coming from the Netanyahu administration, but I still think that this is probably for the best for Israel over the long term. I think less war, less tensions in the region, it represents a more peaceful future for the country and for Israelis as well.
I do want to note for our audience here on Bloomberg TV and radio and those joining us on YouTube as well, that we are seeing President Trump's motorcade rolling up to Lusail Palace in Doha for the Qatari state dinner. Of course, once again, for the second day in a row, seeing a lot of pomp and circumstance that comes with this trip for the president. We have our eyes on the beast, which has made the trip to the Middle East as President Trump is getting ready to emerge and participate in this state dinner, having already announced, as we were just discussing, hundreds of billions of dollars, at least, in economic deals between Qatar and the United States.
That's for sure, Kailey, as we have this live view of the president, I guess, about to emerge from the beast, as you mentioned. He's on his way to a state dinner that will conclude this day of travel in Qatar. And Natasha, I wonder what you expect to come from this dinner, if this is more deal making or a chance for the president to put the negotiating down for a moment.
I mean, I think this might be putting the negotiating down for a moment, but perhaps longer indirect talks. We know that Sheikh Tamim, the Emir of Qatar, was supposed to have a 30-minute meeting with President Trump. It went on for 2 hours. We don't know why. We do know that the Israeli negotiators have been somewhat intransigent on Witkoff's plan for Gaza and hostage releases. So there could be some tensions there that need to be worked out. So it remains to be seen if President Trump is going to apply pressure to Israel or others to move something forward. But certainly, I think this pomp and circumstance does help, I think, to grease the wheels of those negotiations for sure.
And President Trump has just emerged from his vehicle heading into that state dinner with Qatar. We also heard from the president yesterday, Natasha, of course, speaking at the Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum in Riyadh, about how he wants to be a peacemaker as president, talking about, obviously, ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, mentioning the Houthis as well, what he'd like to see with Iran, but also an expansion of the Abraham Accords, making it very clear his desire for Saudi Arabia to join in. And I wonder if you think this trip has realistically brought him closer to that objective.
You know, I think it has, in a sense, even for Syria, which we couldn't have expected before. I think that there's an acknowledgement, though, that the way that things are, it would be very, very challenging for Saudi Arabia or Syria to sign the Abraham Accords, that things need to get straightened out. There needs to be a broader peace before that happens. But of course, he did mention that several times during his speech. But I think what he really was trying to emphasize was that this needs to be a region for the region. And really showing that the Gulf players can be shapers of the region themselves. And not just the United States and not just Israel. And so I think that that is a really pronounced rebalancing in the region that we don't know what to expect entirely. But I mean, I think this is a considerable shift.
You think Donald Trump gets to Turkey this week?
I mean, one can hope, I think, for peace for Ukraine as well. But we do know that Secretary of State Rubio will meet with Sheibani, the foreign minister of Syria. And so this just, I think, shows greater engagement diplomatically. So not just on the financial side, but militarily and diplomatically as well. And I think that's what Sheikh Tamim of Qatar was really trying to emphasize with his meeting, that he sees Trump essentially as a man of peace. And really trying to play up those optics as much as possible. But I think both sides, whether it's a Gulf state or Turkey, is really trying to play up their hand in terms of being negotiators, being shapers. And I think Trump is giving them those wins. Like I said, I think on every occasion that he has been asked, he has said that he really looks to President Erdogan of Turkey for consultation. So that is a significant move in and of itself.
All right, Natasha Hall, Senior Fellow with the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Thanks for coming along. It's Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. I missed you. We're back on the fastest show in politics with a lot of talk about this airplane while I was gone. Every day I woke up and read something new about this 747 that ABC started talking about. This is the plane from Qatar. It wasn't until the Washington Post got to it this week, though, that I really had a sense of what we were talking about here. And the more I learn, the more I'm asking questions. Of course, a 747 is what Boeing made that became Air Force One. There are two of them, and they're aging. We talked about this in the first Trump administration, and getting Boeing to make more has taken time. So we're looking now at this so-called gift from Qatar to retrofit what is a 13-year-old aircraft at some $400 million, but the retrofit would cost a lot more than that. As we learn, of course, and we're hearing concern from a lot of Republicans now in Washington. You could pick out John Thune if you want. You could look at Ted Cruz suggesting that there are great concerns here about security, not to mention the idea of gifting under the rules of the Constitution. Donald Trump, though, talking about this, he can't figure out exactly what the problem is here, as he's made clear on Truth Social and in speaking about this on his trip through the Middle East. Here he is. Listen. Do we not have Donald Trump here? All right. Let's take a look at what he's writing. He says the 747 is being given to the United States Air Force Department of Defense. Not to me! Exclamation point. So you've got the question of the gift, and then you got the question of the work that's being done here. I'm going to get to both of these with Ashley Davis, Republican strategist, partner at S3 Group, former special assistant to the director of Homeland Security. Her wheelhouse is national security, and that's where we want to get into because there are concerns about whether this plane is actually going to be safe for the president to use. Nice to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. Welcome back for you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back here. Here's the part that I'm having a hard time with understanding when it comes to the jet, is that Donald Trump likely would never be able to use it. This airplane would take years of work, billions of dollars in upgrades, and impossible to complete before Donald Trump takes office. So what does he want this for?
So, Joe, you know I'm a big believer that there are various levels to what he does.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the national security part of this. Mm-hmm. One, it's going to take 2 to 3 years to retrofit this plane if it actually ends up coming to the United States. I mean, there's absolutely no way that our Department of Defense, our intel community would ever not take that and strip it completely to make sure it's the safest plane in the world. But I also think, you know, supposedly he is very angry about not getting his plane for 6 years he's been wanting this plane. So he's angry about it. He talked about it again yesterday. Mm-hmm. He's continuing the dialogue so I think he's poking a little bit at the company that is making the plane, and so he's trying to cause a little bit of friction there. Mm-hmm. But he also I think this is a diversion tactic in a way as well. So I'm a big believer.
To get the actual Boeing planes he's
ordered?
Yes,
and put a little pressure on them to actually deliver their plane. But also I think, look, there is so much happening right now in Washington, mm-hmm. and this is the number one story on every news network.
It sure is. It's been days of coverage. While he's rolling through the Middle East.
And so one thing I just want to say...
Does that help him?
Listen, are we talking about Medicaid, really? Are we talking about SNAP?
Are we talking about investments in the Middle East?
Well, that's what it's taking away from.
Yeah.
So even though my theory is he's trying to take away a little bit from some of the potential bad noise that could be happening in Washington right now, it is also taking away for some of the big investments that he's making. I think, you know, obviously the plane was in West Palm Beach. It was mm-hmm. at Mar-a-Lago when some of the Qataris were visiting. He saw the plane. He loved it. And then he just started this dialogue. And the reason he knows that there's a lot of people and a lot of things that are very controversial about this, from just a gifting perspective,
right?
Even if they give it to the library,
yes,
at the end of the day. But he's doubling down on it. So to me, he knows exactly what he's doing. To the rest of us, maybe we're just not sure what that is yet.
Well, there's a massive constitutional component to this, of course. So I'm not going to try to turn you into a constitutional lawyer, but I will point you to this headline in the Washington Post. Trump's gifted Qatari 747 would be a security problem, officials say. By the way, it was moved 5 weeks ago, they learned, to San Antonio International Airport. So he's apparently already taken delivery of this jet. I mean, can you strip this to the studs and actually make it safe from a national security standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could have the same national, even though Boeing that made Air Force One to this point as a U.S. company, they would still go through the exact same thing that they're going to go through this plane. By the way, the Department of Defense, from what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, and Joe, you've heard something different, they have not officially accepted this plane as a gift.
That's what we understand, but what's it doing sitting in San Antonio becomes the question,
I mean,
right?
who knows? It was Mar-a-Lago too. Right?
It's been suggested that the upgrades may have already begun at that location.
Maybe. I don't know that.
Sure, of course. But this is what we're learning, and I'm trying to get the latest stuff here. What needs to happen to a $400 million airplane to make it safe for the president to fly on?
Well, listen, I mean, Air Force One will have the absolute, no matter who's in it, is going to have the absolute most secure, whether it's from the communications perspective. They will strip it to put in all the different missile detectors that they have in regards to Air Force One. I mean, if you think about, and this is a conversation that's hard to get onto on the air right now with limited time, but what the plane has, especially like with Bush after 9/11 when he was, or on 9/11 when he was flying around the country, different things that they put on the airplane for security, the same thing they do in Israel for a lot of their planes in regards to their military planes, that will take years to put on the plane.
Yeah, so he may not actually get to enjoy this thing, which is kind of bizarre. We'll find out.
Well, he could if it goes to the library. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I think Rick's on next. He can talk about the library ins and outs. But I mean, because he knows that from McCain. But I think there's definitely federal oversight that these presidential libraries have. So we'll see. I mean, look. It's a story. It's a story has a lot of ethical questions. That's not something unusual for the president.
Yeah,
so,
right. Well, and to your point, it's keeping us away from a lot of other stories.
Absolutely.
What do you think about this trip so far? Because some of the math doesn't add up. Whether it's the Boeing jets we're hearing about, whether it's the overall investments from countries like Saudi Arabia or Qatar. I'm more concerned about the optics, as always, that we talk about here. The image of this meeting yesterday with the president, with MBS, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Jensen Huang. Is this a new approach to the presidency? Have we seen anything like this before?
No, I think he's trying to do two things. One, I think he believes that part of the country is, in regards to economic growth, is one of the fastest, best places to invest in. And a lot, believe me, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East, and everybody is trying to get in, either in there or for them to invest in them. So
is this part of turning away from China?
Absolutely. It's also trying to do an economic diplomacy in a way with the region. If you look at some of the things he's asking for, and he asked for yesterday with Saudi, and he's asking for today with Qatar, is trying to have softer stance on Israel. I mean, us being friends with this region in regards to our relationship with Israel is not a bad idea. And also, the more we're coming together, even with the announcement yesterday with Syria, in regards of rolling back the sanctions, I mean, I think that having a strong Middle East with America to fight potentially China and Russia is what he's trying to do. Obviously, there's a business side of it as well, but there's definitely a diplomacy side of this as well. And also, remember the Abraham Accords. I mean, that was unheard of.
Sure.
Whether anyone wants to give him credit for it,
he brought it up yesterday. Could he expand them?
I mean, we'll see. I mean, I don't know who you're really going to expand with.
You know, the downside here is, if you ask Benjamin Netanyahu, is that there's no Israeli visit. He feels slighted. Are you surprised by that choice?
Yes, but that may be I mean, listen, I was asked this yesterday too. I think there's absolutely no way that we don't have a strong relationship with Israel, that we're not going to support Israel. And I'm sure that I am not aware of and not privy to, there's a strategic reason why that's not happening.
If you're Benjamin Netanyahu and you hear a headline like sanctions against Syria are being dropped while you feel like you're being ignored by the president, that doesn't impact the relationship?
It may, but at the end of the day, is he going to stop a relationship with the United States of America? No.
Highly unlikely.
Yeah.
What does Donald Trump bring home then, other than dollar signs, or is that just the point of the trip?
Well, if he brings home some sort of, if he strikes a deal in Turkey, I mean, let's even go there in regards to
I haven't
Ukraine.
even mentioned Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine, and there's so much to talk about. We could talk for 3 hours
Every day.
just for what happened on this weekend.
Every day, yes, exactly. That's the deal. But maybe that's something that we'll talk about when you come back, because the Ukraine deal is all we're going to be turning to, let's say, in the next 24 hours,
Yeah,
48
that's
hours
tomorrow,
when he gets
right?
to Turkey. Exactly.
Yeah. And so that's something. Well, Putin hasn't agreed to go yet, so
Correct.
but Zelensky has. So we'll see what happens there. If he comes home with, and I agree with you, what you started out this segment saying, all the announcements and investments that have been made. Obviously, those are great announcements, and who knows what actually comes out of them.
Right.
And I hear the music. I have to stop talking,
Oh,
Joe.
man, you can talk right through the music, actually. It's anytime you want. Ashley Davis gets to do anything around here. S3 Group, Republican strategist, and always the insights that we're looking for here.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Here in Washington, there are probably a lot of tired lawmakers, at least in the House of Representatives, on Capitol Hill today, because many of them had to quite literally pull all-nighters last night, including in the House Ways and Means Committee, as it marked up its draft tax bill. That would do a number of things, including, of course, extend the 2017 tax cuts, eliminate taxes on tipped income and overtime until 2028, other elements of President Trump's campaign promises as well. And it finally got through the committee along party lines, no surprise, this morning. But it did so without one issue, perhaps the issue, being resolved. And that is, where exactly do you cap the state and local tax deduction to keep everybody happy? And the people you need to keep happiest are the people who represent blue states in districts that are swingy, that make or break the House majority. And a lot of those so-called SALT caucus members are still looking for an answer from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, at this point.
Sounds like you've been to New York. So 16 hours in committee was not enough to hash any of this out. They had an all-nighter. I mean, they were bringing in takeout and wine at 4:57 a.m. Blake Moore is asleep there on the Ways and Means Committee. So there are questions exactly about how long it's going to take to get this done, Kailey. And for our reality check, we introduce Bill Hoagland. Always great to have Bill with us. Senior Vice President, the Bipartisan Policy Center. Bill, not only do you give us a reality check, but you help us lower the blood pressure for a moment. So I'm wondering if you can distill this moment as one of progress or maybe one of concern for you, because the Speaker of the House seems emboldened. He says very productive, and we might well get this done in time for Memorial Day.
Well, I do think that a lot of progress has been made in terms of the committees that were instructed to come up with the savings, and they almost every one of them has met what was instructed of them. The House Budget Committee will meet Friday morning and bundle all these bills up into one package and report it out. So it is a good possibility that it will all be on the floor and could be done by Memorial Day recess a week from this coming Friday. So, yes, I think there is good progress in that regard. The elements of the package, however, may create some real issues for the Speaker, particularly given today that we were hearing so much from members, some of the more conservative members of the United States Senate that has to take up this bill, who are suggesting that they don't like what's in there. And that will make it more difficult for the Speaker on the floor to get the votes, it seems, from those moderate Republicans, besides the point that Kailey's made about what they still, I don't think, have fully resolved the issue as it relates to the SALT.
Yeah.
Well, and when we consider the moderate Republicans who are nervous at the very least about the cuts to Medicaid, the SALT caucus, which we're talking about, then the hardline conservatives, not just in the Senate, but in the House, who do not think these spending cuts go far enough, knowing how narrow the majority is, Bill, is there enough room to maneuver if you're Speaker Johnson?
It is very tight. Of course, we cannot never rule out the pressure that the President of the United States will have once he gets back from overseas. He will put a lot of pressure on. I do think that it's going to be very nick and tuck down to the end to get the votes, and there will have to be some hard arm swinging, I guess, or bending, if nothing else, to get it through the House of Representatives. But even if it gets through the House of Representatives, I think your listeners have to understand that we still have the United States Senate, and the United States Senate will produce its own bill. And it will be different. It clearly will be different than the House. And then you'll have to have a conference between the House and Senate, and that's then you'll come back and you'll have to vote again on it.
So if the Speaker doesn't have a revolt on his hands now, he will then.
He will then, if it comes back from the Senate much different than what the House is.
What's the Freedom Caucus going to say when the cuts aren't there?
I think they're going to have some real difficulties with this. This is going to be tough. And it was always going to be tough, but when the margins are this small, it makes it even tougher. And then you just still do have the real issue about whether or not this does. As an old budgeteer myself, I do believe debt and deficits matter. So we're looking at tax cuts maybe in $4 trillion, but we're only looking at, quote, only. We're looking at $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. You're adding to the deficit. You're not reducing the deficit. And that's where the hardliners will come from, the Chip Roys of the world, and say, wait a minute, this doesn't go enough in reducing the debt and deficits going forward.
Well, and when we consider some of the things we're hearing out of the Senate, it's not just Senator Josh Hawley making noise about Medicaid. You have other senators as well who are concerned about the repeal of clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, which, with all the Medicaid and SALT talk, is not getting as much attention. But is that actually one of the things that could be the biggest sticking points?
I'm glad you raised that issue, because there are a number of those Republicans who maybe didn't vote for the IRA when it passed, but were behind the scenes saying, good. Because
they're benefiting from it now.
Benefiting from it now, exactly. And so that's going to be tough for them to stomach the cuts and the elimination, quite frankly, of almost all the IRA provisions dealing with clean energy programs that are in there, and the grants that are in there too. And some of those grants are out there already in the community.
You mentioned some of the changes that senators could make. What kind of changes might the parliamentarian force when we get to that stage
that's a
of
good
the process?
point.
The bird bath could bring a few items out that Republicans in the House think they need. Yeah,
it's a good point, Joe. I have to remind people, being an old Senate staffer, that the so-called bird rule really only applies in the Senate. The House can pass it with simple majority, and they can put in things that when the parliamentarian looks at it in the Senate and will find that, wait a minute, these have no budgetary consequences. Deauthorizing programs, fine, but there's no budgetary consequence. So a lot of the things that they put into the House provision for winning those votes to get the vote that we're eliminating a program, but it has no budgetary consequence. They will come. That will be subject to the Byrd rule and will come out unless there are 60 votes to keep them in. So that will also change the real nature of the Senate bill when it comes back to the House.
Well, and so all of this raises the question of the timeline here. As House leadership is still sounding optimistic, we heard Steve Scalise say this will be on the president's desk by the 4th of July. How hard is that going to be to manage if you still have to get it through the Senate in whatever form, get it back to the House, and get them to choke down whatever it is the changes the Senate made?
I would say very, very difficult July 4th. Let's be honest. If they can get this out of the House next week, they go on Memorial Day recess. The whole month of June will be devoted in the United States Senate to getting their bill done. So even if they got their bill done in June, then you'll need the whole month of July just to work out the difference between the House and Senate, if you can do that. So I think I would push the Mr. Scalise's statement to the end of July at the earliest, but even then.
At the earliest.
Okay. You spoke with Lisa McClain yesterday, Republican Congresswoman in the leadership in the House, speaking to the standoff, if I can call it that, over SALT. I want you to hear what she said. I'm just compelled by the fact that this very narrow issue could potentially hang up this entire big, beautiful bill that we're talking about. Here's what she said.
There is some wiggle room. How much wiggle room, that's what we need to determine. But at the end of the day, I think both sides will come together to get this done for the American people. Because what we'll see if we don't get this tax bill done will be gravely worse than what we're experiencing now with the SALT cap for all Americans.
But Bill, if you're Mike Lawler sitting there in New York. You don't have wiggle room. And if you're a no, then this entire effort is going nowhere. What does Speaker Johnson need to do to put this to bed?
Well, I think he does have to negotiate a higher level than the 10,000 for the SALT. He has to move it up. I was surprised to hear that the SALT caucus, so to speak, rejected the 30,000.
Yeah.
That seems strange to me. But there has to be some place between 10,000 and somewhere up above 30,000 maybe that will get it over. I think the representative is absolutely clear, though. If you do not get this done, then the impact upon middle income, quite frankly, because of the marginal tax rates would go up, would be very devastating, both for Republicans and Democrats. That's why, and I'm sure I'm in the minority on this, that's why I think at some point, if they cannot get this reconciliation bill across the line, that there's still a possibility of simply extending the current tax law, so those tax rates don't go up next year on individual Americans.
Well, so that would mean that you kind of separate these things out rather than trying to do one big, beautiful bill. Would that be an endorsement of the Senate's original strategy bill?
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm glad you went there, because I being an old Senate staffer, and I do appreciate the work of the Speaker, of the Majority Leader, Mr. Thune. That was his strategy at the outset. Let's do what we can do, get a win, and then move on. That's where, yes, I think that this validates Mr. Thune's original position.
The wild card for all of this, of course, the debt limit. And that's going to depend greatly on the X date where this actually lands. And is it a good thing for Republicans? In fact, if it lands earlier, and it has to be part of this reconciliation bill.
It does. It does. Right now, increasing the debt limit, we think at the Bipartisan Policy Center, our estimate yesterday we put out, maybe the end of July and maybe into early October. We got a range. We got to wait and see what the tax coming in on the estimated quarterly taxes come in at. But it is in this reconciliation bill. It therefore only requires a simple majority to raise the debt limit. If they cannot get it done, again, I'm probably in the minority here, they can pull that reconciliation of just the debt limit out of this bill and pass it freestanding as a debt limit. Or if they can't do that, then they're back in a situation where I think they're going to have to negotiate with the Democrats, which is the last thing Republicans want. Yeah.
Well, and it would be the first real opportunity for Democrats to have any kind of leverage since January, right?
And this is very similar to where we were in 23 when we were facing a debt limit and increasing the debt limit, and ended up negotiating the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which set new caps for spending for 24 and 25.
So while we're sitting here talking about this bill, is there somewhere quietly on Capitol Hill where that component of reconciliation is being written so it will be ready?
Oh yes. Well, quite frankly, the bills are being written right now.
When it comes to the debt limit.
Well, that's a simple.
So we can crank up that page when we need it.
That doesn't take much time. That doesn't take much time at all.
I will say, I spoke with the Republican conference chair in the House, Lisa McClain, last night, and I asked her, is there a backup plan if we can't get done in time to deal with the debt ceiling? She said they're not really working on that yet because they're so confident in their timeline, but you don't buy that, Bill.
I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Mm-hmm. So backup plan might be necessary. That said, we do know they work better with a deadline, right? So when we're talking about the prospect of the House potentially having to grapple with Senate changes, if you know the X date is looming, recess is looming too, does that actually make it easier for the House to adjust to the Senate's desires?
Well, I think that depends. One could say that the August recess that's sacrosanct in this town for members, it may be in question, and they could work on. I don't think it's going to be as easy as just saying we got this deadline here and let's get it all done beforehand, because these are big policy items in here. You just don't do them willy nilly because there's a August vacation coming up.
Even though it's Washington.
I was just about to say, Bill Hoagland, great as always to have you here on Balance of Power, Senior Vice President of the Bipartisan Policy Center.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
George Clooney back in the news. I don't know if he wanted to be, but it's all anyone's talking about around here once we finish the conversation about the jet from Qatar. You know, he's dyeing his hair now on Broadway. Have you seen he's doing Good Night and Good Luck? Jet black hair. Not something that Joe Biden tried on the campaign trail. Yet we're talking about these two in retrospect, following this new book out here by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. As we read, and this is all about, of course, Joe Biden's mental acuity, what was really happening inside the administration and whether people were covering up for him. A lot of anonymous sources saying things like this story about George Clooney. Shaken to his core, we read. The president hadn't recognized him, a man he had known for years. They write Clooney had expressed concern about Biden's health before. A White House aide told him a few months back they were working on getting the president to take longer steps when he walked, but obviously the problem went far beyond his gait. This was much graver. It was like 2 weeks later he wrote the column that began the unwinding of Joe Biden's run for re-election. A lot of questions about this book, about whether this is actually news and about whether it is productive to be looking in the rearview mirror here as Democrats try to find their way forward. And that's what we're talking about with our political panel in this part of our conversation. Rick Davis is here at the table, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, partner at Stonecourt Capital. Also with us in studio is Adam Hodge, managing director, Pulpit International, our Democratic strategist. Great to see both of you gentlemen here. Adam, you worked in the Biden administration for some time. It's good to see you. I'm sure you don't like reading stories like this, but what's your reaction, and did you actually hear stories like this when you were in the White House?
My initial reaction is that any time the Democrats are spending focused on what's in this book and looking back at how Joe Biden operated and has physical or mental acuity, it's time we're not spending talking about what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing with tax cuts and Medicaid. So from a strategic standpoint, I just think it's a waste of time. Yeah. And I think like if the Democratic Party is going to think about how we go forward, it's about like how do we connect with people. You can look at different pieces of like where we have or haven't invested resources, where we have fallen off connecting with certain pockets of the country, and what policies that we want to put in place that would connect with those folks. That to me feels like a much more valuable use of time, not looking back at whether Joe Biden should or shouldn't have run. The reality is, like it's clear he shouldn't have run. We lost. Like Donald Trump is the president. So like, let's pick it up. Where do we go from here?
Does it sound untrue? Does this sound like conversations you overheard?
No, I mean, I think anybody who we talked about this, I remember last year. Yeah. Joe Biden, it's not like he was in hiding. He would walk to Air Force One. He would walk in the White House. He'd walk up to the podium. Sure, yeah. Right. I remember traveling with him to the NATO summit in Europe. It wasn't like he was somehow missing in action. People saw that he wasn't walking as well as he should have, and that he had stumbles at the podium. So this is all a bit of DC drama that I don't think, I mean, if you take a step back, none of this is a surprise or shocking to anybody, and it doesn't matter in the current day and age, or the current political landscape.
I don't know if this sounds like news to you, Rick. We talked about this a lot in real time while these observations were being had by some. Right. But I'm looking at a book largely full of anonymous sources telling stories like this. Is that the point here?
Yeah, it's kind of reprehensible from my point of view, especially when you look at the campaigns, and unfortunately this happens quite a bit. You lose, and you got to pin the blame. Here we're going to pin the blame on the candidate himself. Yeah. Every single one of the people who are an anonymous source were probably in the position of being on a campaign, being in the White House, or being a part of the administration somehow. And if that's the case, why didn't they quit? If they were so shocked by the behavior of the president and the people around him, why did they partake in that? George Clooney, great example. Oh, he just had this epiphany at a fundraiser. Everybody knew that it was the Joe Biden, before the election cycle. Everybody could have spent a year before the election began saying now's the time for this president to retire, and going to him and doing that. Instead, they do it after primarily a misstep, a failure in a presidential debate. Too little, too late. Everyone there in that book had a reason for him to be on the campaign and speaking, and yet none of them took the risk personally to say, hey, you ought to get out.
And I think, thinking back, though, as you're talking, I'm thinking about what the view of a staffer, someone working in the White House, and thinking about all the stuff you did get done, all the stuff you still had to get done. So all the things like chips and infrastructure and the rescue plan, all these things that were being implemented under the leadership that wouldn't have happened without Joe Biden being president. You want to see those things through. So it's a little bit hard to take a step back and say, I got to do this part of my job, or I'm helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia's invasion. I'm not going to, it is hard to say, I'm going to put all that aside, all the good work that I'm doing.
Sure.
Just because I think the president isn't quite up to the level he was when he ran for president, a few years ago. I think where the Democrats should go forward now, look, this is what we got done under Joe Biden. These are the things that made a positive difference. This is our vision going forward. That has to be the focus. Anything about whether he couldn't walk to Air Force One, to me, I just think it's a huge waste of time.
It's kind of ironic. George Clooney is the man raising all this money for him, making him relatable, and is the one that actually puts the dagger in the heart with the op-ed that came out something like 2 weeks after this supposedly happened. Is there a lesson learned there for the type of surrogates you're rolling with on the campaign?
Yeah, look, I always think it's dangerous to go into the lion's den of L.A. and start hobnobbing with a bunch of liberal, TV and radio and music and movie stars. Yeah. They are usually out of the mainstream of the American public to begin with, right? So look at the outpouring of support they all gave to Kamala Harris, and it didn't amount to a single vote. I think politicians sometimes get stars in their eyes. Oh, I get to hang out with George Clooney. Hey, I'd like to hang out with George Clooney. Come on, barbecue at the back of Davis's house. Right, yeah.
I bet he'd love to be.
But I would never have him, on the stage with a candidate.
Right.
I'm sorry. You're a great movie star. Find me somebody who has a policy issue or a point of view that will be good for the campaign. That's usually not.
And he got Barack Obama up there too at that event. Adam, it just begs the whole question, and everyone's trying to relitigate this whole thing, that I hear Democrats either say he never should have run, and you just made that implication for re-election, that is, that was kind of the original sin, that was the mistake. Others say people appreciate consistency. And what would have happened if he had stayed in the race? Would he have done better than Kamala Harris?
I mean, at all the polls that I've seen.
You say no way to that.
I don't think, there's any credible case.
Could she then the follow-on is, could she have done better if she had 2 years to run?
I think, taking a step back, and this is something that I think we should, just if we're being honest about politics, the 2 times that Democrats have lost to Donald Trump, we haven't had a real competitive primary. The one time we did beat him, we had a real competitive primary, and Joe Biden won. And you can say how the party coalesced around him, but he won the primary in a very wide open primary, and he got elected president. So I think if there's a lesson for Democrats to learn going forward is, how do we have a full, robust primary process where we err and look at who should be the best nominee? And it is valuable because you get around the country. You talk to voters, you spread the Democratic brand, the Democratic gospel about what we want to do for the country. And there's value in that. There's value in going to talking to the people around the country that you just lose without having a competitive primary. And I think some of that, we exceeded expectations in the midterms in 2022. And so there wasn't this clamor to change horses at that point. There's a lot of time between 2022 and 2024. At the end of the day, with where the global economy was with inflation, I don't know how much difference it actually would have made in the outcome.
Is there a failure in journalism here when we've got people who were covering the campaign now writing books that are telling a different story, or are they simply at the mercy of their sources and they're relaying what they're hearing? Should there have been more focus on this by the White House press corps?
I think that the White House press corps gave it a hard look. Adam's
as
Adam was saying,
I was in the White House. They did not hold their punches.
They didn't hold back. There were all these stories, and so there was plenty of juxtaposition of that, and that all led to him getting out of the race.
Sure.
So it wasn't like that didn't happen. I think this is more a story of the underbelly of Washington, D.C., where people take advantage and try and make money and brandish their image by attacking people who are already down and out. Washington has an old line, only kick them when they're down, right? And so this is a classic example of that.
Wow, incredible. It makes you wonder what the next book is going to be. The flurry, the avalanche of Trump books It got to the point where you just couldn't tell them apart. Is Joe Biden going to have his own version of that?
Yeah, I'm sure there will be. Everybody got a book deal, and they'll write about the campaign, and they'll that. So this will be a poor little one out for Chris Marr, who just came on to help Biden defend his, because it's going to be like this for the next several months.
Is that why he's showing up on The View and making speeches?
Yeah,
again?
I mean, I think that's part of it, and I think if you care about your legacy, I mean, like we know history is written by the winners, right? And so you got to try to defend your legacy and talk about what you feel like you accomplished. I assume Biden will write a book of his own, talking about what he feels he accomplished. But I don't think any of that helps Democrats take back the House and the Senate in 2026, win the White House in 2028, and more importantly, regain and rebuild the Democratic Party's brand so that we are a majority-making party across the country for decades to come.
Some think it's attractive to kind of go away when you're done, a la Johnny Carson. If you were, helping Joe Biden during his campaigns the way you did John McCain or other politicians, would you tell him to go home at this point, stay home, don't go on The View, don't write a book?
Yeah, I mean, look, we even had a point of view that, you always had to do your day job. So, when John McCain lost the presidency in 2008, he was a senator.
Yes,
go do your day job.
Yeah.
Don't act like a president. Go do your day job. Be a good senator. Joe Biden is retired. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he is going to be doing things like writing books and maybe penning some articles. And I don't begrudge him for defending his image. But don't do more damage than good, right? I mean, like, how many times did we sit in here during a special at Bloomberg watching a important speech by the president, in trying to reestablish himself, and it was worse than the reporting beforehand. So do no harm, right?
Yeah,
I mean, enjoy the ice cream and the beach, write a great book. You have a lot to talk about in your career. And move on.
Don't listen to Trump news conferences.
Right.
Rick Davis and Adam Hodge, our great panel today. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.